Hello, and welcome to the next edition of Revive and Thrive. This is episode number 14, and I'm your host, Joshua Blum. And today we're going to be going through another episode where we look at a letter of the alphabet, and it stands for a particular concept related to physician burnout, specifically for fathers. And that's what this podcast is. We've been going through the alphabet A to Z, and we're right in the middle at this point, and we're on the letter N. And so every week we talk about a different idea that's kind of related to this topic, with the idea that there are some actionable steps that you can take to work on this, specifically in your life as a father, in your life as a physician. With the letter N, there's lots of things that could fit in there, but it actually is going to be for two simple letters, and that is the word no. So the word no is very powerful. Any of you who have small children know that when they learn the word no, it is quite a revelation. It's something that happens, and for maybe the first time, that child learns that they now have agency over the big people in their life, and they can assert their will in ways that was not possible before, because it's something that they can articulate, that is understood in whatever language that that they're communicating with their parents in. So we're going to go through the word no in some obvious ways that it applies to burnout for physicians, and then some not obvious ways. Let's start with the obvious stuff first. Just as you might expect, saying no is something that when we look at burnout, often people get to a place where they are depleted and they have not been able to set limits on their time. We talked about this in an earlier episode. Being able to put boundaries on your time and being able to protect it is pretty important. And being able to advocate for yourself and say no to certain things, like opportunities that seem like good things but are actually not so great. Being able to kind of piece out things that are what other people want for you, but actually you don't actually want for yourself. And when you end up accepting those things against your better judgment, you end up in this position where you're like, oh, I knew I shouldn't have done that, but I did anyway, because I didn't want to disappoint somebody. I didn't want to not be a team player. I didn't want whatever it is. When we avoid saying no to things again and again and again, because we don't want to disappoint people and we don't want to hurt people's feelings and so forth, we end up accepting things sometimes beyond our control. One of the things I think as physicians, we often want to be perceived as helpful. And that sort of goes back to the central idea of what a physician does, that they help other people. That's why many medical students or people who are applying to medical school will say that why they want to become a doctor. I want to be a doctor to help people. Now, what that actually means is, of course, subject to a lot of debate. But at the very core of it, if part of our identity comes from being helpful, what happens when we can no longer be helpful? Or there is the perception that we're not helpful. If we say no to things, if we say no to certain requests, patient comes in and wants certain things, and we have to say, no, I can't do that. Sometimes we feel bad about it. Now, there's certain things that we may put some limits on and say, like, no, I can't do that because that's unethical. But we may know plenty of people who will cross that line because they're either uncomfortable with saying no, they're afraid of saying no, they just feel bad, right? And they want to make other people happy. I had an attending once in residency who said something to the effect of, I just want to make other people happy all the time. Why can't I make other people happy? And he wasn't talking about patients, actually. He was talking about colleagues. And so that says a lot in many ways. That's sort of the difficulty that a lot of us run into. And it certainly could be with patients, though. Patient comes in and wants something that you don't really think would be a great idea, that maybe they want a narcotic or something like that. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, well, maybe just this once, you're having a hard time. We'll write you a script for Ativan. Maybe it's a painkiller or something like that. But you're like, yeah, this is probably not a great idea. This is probably not going to go very well. And then it happens again, and you're like, okay, maybe, and so you can see how it can kind of slide because you can make an exception to justify your response at the time. So saying no and being able to advocate for ourselves and it's sort of like being able to be assertive and say, these are the reasons why I'm saying no right now, can be an important skill to learn. And so that's sort of the obvious sort of thing. And I think we all know that. I think teaching that particular skill to physicians, while it is a good thing and is certainly something that we need to be reminded of, I think it's often in other parts of our life too. Physicians are notoriously poor negotiators. We often don't negotiate for jobs, and administrators in those positions often expect us not to and act irritated when we do. It's one of those skills actually that saying no is actually something we're actually quite good at, because most of us got here by saying no to lots of other things in our life. The training to become a physician involves saying no to lots of things that maybe your classmates, say in high school and college, didn't have to say no to. So the idea of delaying gratification, being able to say no to things for right now with the idea of a payoff later on, is something that we're actually really good at in most cases. And sometimes we get so good at that now becomes a default response. No, 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 no. Plan for tomorrow, forget about today. Let's just grind, plan for tomorrow. It's a good thing. Overall, it's a good thing. It often leads to success, but the problem with it is that sometimes the destination that we're looking for doesn't lead to happiness. It doesn't lead to fulfillment. And all along the way, there was suffering and pain and all these other things that we're like, okay, it's going to pay off when we get to that point, when we get to that summit of the mountain, so to speak. Often it does not, because we're so used to living for tomorrow that we forget to enjoy and take stock of the journey along the way, right? So delayed gratification sometimes can be a bitter pill. Physicians are actually really good at saying no in some ways. That's one of the things that I think we have to just keep in mind, that any skill that gets overused, it's just like a muscle that gets overused, right? It hypertrophies. So any response that we continue to fall back on starts to become the default. I would also say, and this is starting to get a little bit more towards the not obvious side of no, I would also put naysaying in that category too. And you could say that N also stands for naysayers. Whenever we want to do something, there will inevitably be people in your life, or perhaps even ourselves, who say no, the naysayers in your life. Sometimes we'll have an idea for something and we'll say like, well, why can't we do that? And there'll be somebody who says like, well, that's just not the way it's done, or that's not going to work, or you don't have the skill, the ability to, whatever it is, to do that. Sometimes those people are coming at that with a view towards looking after you, because they don't want to see you suffer. Maybe a family member, like a parent or something like that. You say like, I want to move to whatever, this thing. I want to, maybe I want to go back to school and study for something else. I want to change careers, or maybe I want to change specialties, and a parent might say, or another family member might say like, why do you want to do that? You have a good thing going right here. Why not just stick it out? Maybe you want to change jobs. Maybe you want to have another child. Maybe whatever it is. Someone will say no. So recognize, I think, that sometimes they're coming at that from a place of love and concern, and they're saying no to protect you. Sometimes they're coming at it from a totally different response, from more of a, this is about me, this is not about you. They're saying like, this decision that you are considering is making me uncomfortable, so I'm going to say no because I'm protecting myself. I don't really care about you and what you want. Now, they're probably not going to couch it in those terms, but it is a difference between sort of an altruistic, I guess, action versus one that's more self-motivated. The intentions can be sometimes difficult to read. And I think it's always a good idea when someone says no like that. Why? Ask why. Because you might be surprised. You may be very surprised as to their motivations, assuming someone will give those motivations to you. In the past, we talked about the idea of narcissism, which is another N word. I guess we could also use the episode for, but we talked about it before. And so I won't focus on it now, other than to kind of just remind you that when we use the word narcissism, it gets thrown around a lot in the lay public. It's not necessarily always a bad thing. Healthy narcissism is what we would call self-esteem. We all have certain narcissistic needs. We have a need for sleep. we have a need for food, we have a need for liquids, we have a need for love and affection, we have a need for keeping ourselves occupied. All these different things, those are all needs, sort of basic needs for a human. Making sure that those needs get met, of course, kind of ties back to the initial part, saying no to things in order to protect ourselves, right? To be able to advocate for ourselves against people who would do us wrong or whatever. Going back to that other one about the naysayers, sometimes their own narcissistic needs, the need for stability, they're fundamentally kind of like anxious people, and so the need for not experiencing that particular uncomfortable emotion overpowers any particular benefit that they could see for you, and they think in terms of themselves. We all have, every single one of us have narcissistic needs. I don't know if this is still true. I studied evolutionary biology in college. There was this idea that, at least in nature, you would put aside humans for a second, there's no such thing as altruism. That altruistic actions are really just sort of selfish actions couched in acts that to an outsider look like they're giving, but they're really for some other ulterior motive that is more self-motivated. So I don't know, maybe that's a more pessimistic way of looking at the world. I guess you could say you could define altruism as a higher order function that, humans do, but then you could argue that animals may do that as well that are, they're not human. We'll never really know, right? Bears do bear things and humans do human things, and so they're fundamentally different experiences, or whatever animal that you're thinking of. But I think one thing when it comes to this particular topic is that for physicians, and this goes back to the need to be helpful, sometimes the narcissistic need is a need to be appreciated. And when that does not happen, that's often a lead-in for burnout in many ways. Now, if we think about the role of a father, being a parent fundamentally is a thankless job in a lot of ways, especially earlier on, right? Again, our need to be appreciated for what we do, especially as a father, if you think about the traditional male role of provider, it may come as a default that that's sort of what you do. But if no one ever says thank you, if people kind of just assume that's what you're going to do and they don't necessarily express appreciation on a regular basis, you may feel that, they're just kind of like, they're taking me for granted, or they don't really care, or whatever. It probably isn't true, but if no one says anything otherwise, then we may forget. And so understanding that we have a narcissistic need as much as, say, air, water, food, whatever, for appreciation and respect for what we have done is also there. And if that's not being met, and it's often a factor why a lot of physicians will leave jobs and so forth, that often will eat at us and contribute to burnout. So going over to the not obvious side, we've kind of been working our way there. Interestingly enough, I started off by talking about no as a default that many of us go to, but I would say that opportunities often are probably more likely to occur if you say yes. That's the flip side of it. It's when do you know to say yes? When do you know to say no? If you say no to everything, people stop asking you. People stop inviting you to things, because you could just get known as that guy who always says no to everything. And so opportunities stop coming your way. So obviously there can be no without yes, right? If it's always one response, then that's really no response. So I think the thing that I would think about with that is there are going to be certain situations where it's going to be important for you to say yes, certain things where it's important for you to say no to them. It's often going to come down to a very personal decision, one that you want to probably make intentionally as opposed to reflexively. So if your reflexive nature is to say no to everything or to yes to everything, then that's the part that we want to stall a little bit. So I guess the actionable thing to think about for today, if there are certain things in your life that you typically almost always say no to, let's say your kids want you to do something and you're like, oh God, that's not what I want to do. Maybe they want you to play a particular game with them and you're like, no. The next time they ask you, consider saying yes. You don't necessarily have to actually say yes, but ask yourself, what would happen if I did say yes? Maybe you actually even want to try. because maybe you'll have a different experience this time than you did before. And if you don't, then at least you'll know. But I would ask yourself why, because in the why, you may find some reason for what is actually bothering you. Kids always want to play hide and seek, and you hate that, and you say no to it. Ask yourself why. Maybe the reason is because it's very time consuming. Maybe you have other things that you need to do that you could use that time for. And that leads to a bigger discussion of like, okay, can I do those at a different time? Can I use the time when I'm with my children to just be with my children? So it can go deeper as you pull back the layer of the onion. The flip side of that, I would say, is that if there's something that you always default to as yes, then think about actually saying no to it. If someone consistently calls you, let's just say, and they're kind of a drain on your time and your resources in more than one ways, maybe don't answer the phone, or consider what would happen if you actually just let it go to voicemail. Same things may apply. You may discover that in thinking about why that actually is, and thinking about it in an intentional way, you may discover the root issue. That's a little exercise to think about and play with in your day-to-day life that you may be able to apply to aspects of your work life as well, and vice versa. If you happen to do this in as part of your work life, think about doing it in your day-to-day non-work life. So that's it for this week. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.